played Botany Manor in the depths of December, right after Christmas, so there's nothing left for me to look forward to. And it's January soon, and it's cold, and I'm Canadian, and it's depressing and dark, and I haven't seen green in months. So it was hugely refreshing. But I was inspired to make a tiny version for myself that would be tiny, 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 but same concept with some art that I've already made. I'm a big fan of making tiny pixel art animations, and I already had like 4 plant animations I'd made the year before. I just popped those in some plant pots and figured, how hard can it be to make a little puzzle game? I'll make it like one screen. It'll be so small in scope. With my like very limited skill set, I've made a couple games before, so it's like, how hard can it be? I think the hardest part of making a game is sticking with it. I'm definitely a project hopper. I don't stick to things for a very long time. But I wanted to get this out, so I started small. I was like, I'll make one plant work. And then I just kind of, the scope creep kind of got to me. But here's the process of how I did complete this tiny game. And you're welcome to play it down below. It does not take long. I'm still happy I completed it, and I'm so happy to work on a project that is inspired by something that gave me so much joy. Let's get on with it. The pixel art I made all in Aseprite, so I'll show you the process. It's super simple. It's my process is I just mess around until I figure it out. I usually have a reference of some kind, but sometimes I just look at the final image and then I'll work out the animation kind of backwards. Actually, it's probably 90% of it. I'll draw the flower first, then I'll work from what I know about plants to the animation. Then I just pop that into a sprite sheet and we've got a plant. Then I used the exact same drag and drop mechanic that I actually used in this dress-up game I made. So I have a whole tutorial on that if anyone's interested. But then it got a little more complicated. Concept-wise, puzzles are tricky. I figured I'd just use most of the similar things from Botany Manor. But even copying kind of the concept, communicating to the player what they're supposed to do is a whole thing. I think a job is based on that, actually. I think there's careers around it. So I'm not going to beat myself up too bad for my first attempt here. But basically, I had no idea how to communicate to the player what to do. I was like, do I use words? Do I use text? Do I use pictures? I ended up just like kind of drawing images on the pots that would kind of hopefully give a hint on how to make the plant grow. And I don't know. I think that most of the time when people play the game, they just kind of click around until they do everything. Process of elimination. And I didn't want to draw more pot pictures, so we went with it. We only moved forward. Then I ran into some small errors where I had buttons. I'd use buttons and area 2D to make my clickable fields. I found there's a little bit of overlap here. The UI doesn't interact super conveniently with the area 2D objects. So definitely I would go one or the other for that, unless you're using actual UI, which I was not. My whole game is basically a UI feature, but I recommend using just area 2D or just buttons, just because I ran into so many unnecessary issues with that. I also wanted to do a little bit of lighting, so I tested out some of this lighting stuff. Not a huge amount to say about that. I basically put one light in the game and used it to make the whole thing prettier. One of the puzzles involves plugging in a fan. There's a couple ways to do it. I really wanted this to feel tactile. I wanted everything you click to be clickable, to have some sort of interaction, and to be kind of unique. So I figured we'll use the line 2D to make it so you can kind of drag around the wire until you find where to plug it in. And this took so much longer than I thought it would. It was so tricky to restrict the movement but also tie it to the fan. But I eventually got it working, but here's the script for it. It's so unnecessarily long for something I thought would be so simple. But I think it's pretty cute, and I am happy with it. I would do this again. The other thing I wanted to do was this watering can. So I used particle effects for that and just a basic rotation. One funny thing is that I'm using collisions to do everything. So you have to have a collider on the plant to trigger the watering effect. but you can't see the collider, and when I rotated the pot, the whole thing would go out of alignment. So I actually rotate the whole pot, rotate the collision backwards, and then reverse that to put it down again, which felt redundant, but it works. So that's what we did. The other thing is I didn't really understand the concept of grids in games, and I didn't want to learn. So I just kind of put these areas everywhere with collisions to place the stuff on, and it's very inaccurate, I would say. Definitely going forward, I'm going to learn about grids, probably, if I feel like it. And then I just would say that's 90% of the game is click and drag, and then so many booleans as well. I made trigger effects for everything. A lot of the scripting was just setting booleans to true and false depending on what the user did, and just keeping track of that all. I got a little more organized near the end, but my initial code was spaghetti code, so it was I can see why people try and keep their code clean even for personal projects, because the more scripts you have, the more complex it will get, and then you don't remember what you did last month. I don't remember what I did last week. So I'm really keeping it clean for my dev team of myself, me, myself, and I, future, present, and past. We're all different people. What else? Sound effects. I really had a hard time with that. I actually did download and make this little jingle. I made this little jingle with some sort of software that I'll put here. Also a whole career is making sound effects. I understand why. I was lost. Eventually I decided I would just download some and credit the audio. And yeah, this was fun for me. I would do it again, but not anytime soon. What a lot of work. Oh my goodness. But here's the final result, and enjoy it if you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.